For a significant portion of games out there, capturing action through gameplay and letting players engage with it in different ways is the whole point, which means there's an embarrassment of riches to choose from for anyone looking for that sort of experience. Of course, that kind of saturation means not every game is going to get the kind of recognition it deserves. In past features, we've spoken about underrated action games that more people need to check out, and here, we're going to go over a few more. The Saboteur. The definition of a cult classic, Pandemic Studios' 2009 World War II stealth action game is one that deserved more praise than it got back in the day. Though it certainly had issues, it had more than enough strengths to make up for them, from an incredible visual aesthetic and an atmospheric setting to excellent open-world action, and much more. Enslaved, Odyssey to the West. Ninja Theory had developed more than its fair share of underrated action games over the years, but few of them stood out the way that Enslaved Odyssey of the West did. A linear cinematic action-adventure title with fun combat and an engaging story is the sort of thing that we just can't get enough of. But for whatever reason, back when it first launched in 2010, Enslaved was largely overlooked by many. Astral Chain. Platinum Games is one of the studios that is most strongly associated with the action genre, but in its lineup of games, Astral Chain feels like one of the more underrated ones. Releasing on the Switch in 2019, it was received quite well by critics and players alike, but it only managed to sell a little over 1 million copies, and it seems like Nintendo and Platinum don't intend to return to the IP for a sequel. That's an absolute shame, because the first game was excellent. The Wonderful 101. We'll stick with Platinum just a tad longer because The Wonderful 101 is yet another Nintendo exclusive, originally at least, action title developed by the studio that just did not get its due. As unique as it was a blast to play, The Wonderful 101 proved to be divisive among many when it first launched, while it also didn't help that, upon release, it was a Wii U exclusive. Thankfully, its remaster opened it up to a much larger audience, because this is a game that more people need to play. Alice: Madness Returns. Sadly, it doesn't look like we're ever going to get a new installment in American McGee's Alice series, but we can at least look back on some of its highest highs, 2011's Alice: Madness Returns being full of them. From the crunching combat to, of course, the game's uniquely dark and twisted take on a familiar fairy tale, Alice: Madness Returns had plenty that those who played it absolutely fell in love with.
Oh, my wonderland's shattered.
Ghostwire Tokyo.
They won't stop me.
Developed by the recently shuttered Tango Gameworks, Ghostwire Tokyo was the studio's first attempt to step away from the Evil Within IP. And though it wasn't as successful as Hi-Fi Rush, it was a solid game in its own right. Exploring a ghostly and desolate Tokyo was an engaging experience, as was taking on a variety of twisted freaks and monsters in magical, explosive first-person combat. It was admittedly a bit too straightforward and generic with its design in several ways, but there's still a lot of fun to be had in this game. Binary Domain. Given the fact that Binary Domain has appeared in a million-plus lists calling it underrated over the years, can we still call it underrated? Either way, Ryuga Gotoku Studios' 2012 third-person shooter is nonetheless a diamond in the rough that could have been a truly special game if it had more time to realize its undeniably compelling vision.
Yo, Dan, hide! So this is the resistance HQ was talking about.
To say that Binary Domain did not deserve its criticism would maybe not be entirely honest, but at the same time, it's also true that it perhaps deserved more recognition for the many things that it did do right. Dead Island 2. Dead Island 2 has sold quite well, so the game has seen the success it deserves, but those who haven't played it maybe don't realize just how good the game is. Seriously, Dead Island 2 is unreasonably good, especially for a game that spent so long in development hell across so many studios. Not only is it an absolutely stunning game to look at, thanks to crunching mechanics, an impressive variety of weapons, and an ocean of blood and gore, every combat encounter in the game is an absolute blast. The Surge 2. We couldn't possibly get through this list without mentioning at least a couple of Souls-like. The Surge 2 is an admittedly flawed game thanks to its technical issues, bland level design, and more, but there's also enough here to grab you if you're a fan of the genre. Rewarding and challenging combat, engaging progression mechanics, a cool sci-fi setting, plenty of well-designed boss fights. Those looking for fun Souls-like action will find quite a bit of it here. Ashen. Speaking of Souls-likes, Ashen is another one that fans of the genre should be paying more attention to. Indie Studios A44's debut outing first launched in 2019, and though it was successful enough in its own right, it was a good enough execution of the Souls-like formula to have ideally attracted a larger audience. Some rough difficulty scaling issues aside, Ashen was a gorgeous and compelling Souls-like. Evil West. A fairly recent release, and arguably also one of the better ones of all the games that we've mentioned in this future, Evil West is in many ways a dream game for fans of old school action games who are desperately hoping for a return to that style of experience. Crunching action against fantastical foes and linear design in a captivating setting, that sort of focus and simplicity isn't something we see in games too often these days, which makes Evil West all the more valuable. Scarlet Nexus. Scarlet Nexus is a flawed game, to say the very least, but it's also one that we're desperately hoping to see a sequel to. Why? Well, because there's a ton of potential here. When it launched in 2021, the action RPG had its fair share of issues, but from a well-realized cyberpunk setting to an incredible combat system, it also had quite a lot going for it. Hopefully, people will continue to find this game because that might convince Bandai Namco to develop a follow-up. Samurai Jack Battle Through Time. Have you ever hoped for a return to those old-school character action games, like Ninja Gaiden or what have you? Samurai Jack Battle Through Time, which released in 2020, was certainly not as good as those games, but it was a surprisingly solid action romp in its own right. Some frustrating mechanics and data design issues aside, it delivered bombastic action and slick traversal mechanics in a fairly compact experience. Quantum Break. Quantum Break maybe doesn't stand toe-to-toe with Remedy Entertainment's best outings, but it's got a lot of what usually makes the studio's games so great. Gorgeous visuals, gripping storytelling, plenty of sci-fi weirdness, and a spectacular combat system that combines third-person shooting with some incredibly realized time manipulation mechanics. Some parts of Quantum Break could have done with more time in the oven, like maybe the entire TV show side of things, for instance, but for action lovers, there's a lot of incredible shooter combat to be had here.
Are you sure it's supposed to do that?
Stable.
What was that?
Rollerdrome. Speaking of incredible shooter combat, we're going to close things off with another quite recent release, Rollerdrome, an excellent third-person shooter developed by Roll7, another studio that was sadly recently shuttered. Roller skating and shooting fools isn't a combination we've seen too often in games, but Rollerdrome takes that idea and runs with it, delivering some of the smoothest and most addictive action in a game in recent years. Hey, did you know that we at GamingBolt upload new videos every day? Stick around, drop a like, subscribe, and hit that bell, and let us know what kind of content you'd like to see in the future with a comment below.